Hey guys, today we're going to take you to Neshoba County, Mississippi, and see if we can see and learn and explore all about what's called Freedom Summer in 1964 Mississippi. Come along with us. Let's go explore. The Mississippi Project, or what is more commonly known as Freedom Summer, was a voter registration drive in 1964 that was trying to increase the number of registered African American voters in Mississippi. The events were organized by groups like Congress on Racial Equality, or CORE, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and run at the local level by COFO, or Council of Federated Organizations. We've been walking around the square in Philadelphia and looking at the Neshoba County Courthouse, where the state trials took place. This is Mount Zion United Methodist Church, and on June 16, 1964, they were conducting a meeting of church officers. As these officers were leaving the church, a group of Ku Klux Klansmen met them outside and dragged them out of their vehicles and beat J.R. Cole, Georgia Rush, and her son, John Thomas. The church was burned to the ground later that evening. A guy named Sam Bowers, who was the imperial wizard of the KKK, had issued a hit on a Freedom Summer worker named Michael Schwerner. Schwerner was the COFO president, or the guy sent to Philadelphia to lead in organizing the voter registration efforts. The only thing left standing after the fire that night was this 40-year-old bell. It, of course, was used to announce the beginning of church services. James Chaney, Mickey Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman had been in Ohio at a civil rights training session where they were learning how to better conduct the voter registration drive. The three returned to Philadelphia on June the 21st to secure affidavits about the raid, the beatings, and of course the burning of the church. As we step back from the church and try to give you the ability to take the whole scene in, use your imagination and think about what it must have been like for those church members as they exited the building on June 16, 1964, and encountered the Klansmen and the beatings that awaited them. We're standing in a little bit older section of the cemetery, and you've been looking at some graves that would have witnessed those events. Mickey Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman left the site of the burned-out church around 4 o'clock on June 21st, 1964. They were returning to Meridian, not too far away. The church was rebuilt and rededicated in February of 1966 with a plaque near the front to pay tribute to the three civil rights workers. In 1989, a historical marker was placed at the church. This was done to help commemorate the 25th anniversary of the murders. The listeners of WKXI Radio in Jackson donated this marker. Let's take one last look toward Mount Zion and imagine the church burning. The vehicle they were driving in, which was a Ford station wagon, was known as a CORE vehicle, and somewhere on their return trip to Meridian, when they passed through Philadelphia, they were pulled over by Deputy Cecil Price. James Chaney, who was driving, was charged with speeding, and the other two were held for investigation, for they were considered suspects in the church fire. The three men were brought here and walked down whatever served as the sidewalk at the time and would have been booked into jail. You're walking by what was once used as office space, and the booking area would have been right inside that door. The old jail was bought a few years ago and refurbished as apartments. I'm not sure if anyone currently lives here. You know, I said a few minutes ago that they left the church about 4. Actually, Deputy Price escorted the three here to the old jail and booked them in about 4 o'clock. We're going to look around the corner here, and you can see the red brick building, which is where the holding cells would have been located. In the schematic, you notice that A denotes the booking desk behind the doorway we were at earlier, and of course the cells where Cheney was located. He, of course, was by himself in a cell designated for African Americans only, and Goodman and Schwerner were held in the cell just up from his. Despite the fact that the fines for speeding were posted on the wall, Price told the three men that they would have to remain in jail until the justice of the peace arrived to process the fine. Warner was denied his request to make a phone call, and at some point, Deputy Price left the jail. In Meridian, Corps staff began calling nearby jails and police stations because the three men had not reported in. The jailer's wife in Philadelphia claimed there was no phone call to the jail on the 21st, but Corps records indicate that the Philadelphia jail was called around 5:30. Deputy Price came back to the jail sometime around 10 p.m., collected the money from Mr. Cheney's fine, and told the three to get out of the county. They were never seen alive again. A little while before all that took place, Mount Nemo Missionary Baptist Church was the only local church that would allow Corps to hold mass meetings to register people to vote. I've seen records to indicate James Cheney was engaged in activities here, so I'm sure the other two probably were as well. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a memorial service here at Mount Nebo a couple years after the slaying. That same year, in 1966, Mount Nebo was headquarters for a countywide boycott to protest incidences of police brutality. There is a monument in honor of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner in front of Mount Nebo. Traveling back up the street from Mount Nebo, you pass by the building that used to house the funeral home of Charles Evers. Charles is the brother of Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers was another civil rights leader from the state of Mississippi who urged African Americans to register to vote. The building you see now is what I believe used to be the funeral home. Charles also ran a taxi company and a hotel. It was located next to the funeral home here, or between the funeral home and the COFO office on the next corner. Many of the COFO workers stayed in the hotel. You can see the remains of the hotel as we pass by. Area was a site of violence during the times in 1964 immediately following the murders. At one point, a gunman fired into the hotel and the COFO workers returned gunfire. This is where the COFO office was located on Carver Avenue. COFO was the coordinating body for civil rights movement efforts in the state during Freedom Summer. A large COFO sign visibly marked the building with black and white hands linked together. Today, this sign is on display in the old Capitol Museum in Jackson, Mississippi. Across the street from the COFO office was the site of the former home of a Mrs. Lily Jones. Aunt Lil promoted the civil rights movement from her front porch rocking chair. She had the ideal looking post for cars coming down the street. She also spearheaded the support for the memorial located at Mount Nebo Missionary Baptist Church. She died in 1983 and is buried at Mount Zion Methodist Church Cemetery. The burned up 1963 blue Ford station wagon the three workers were driving was found by a Chickasaw Indian that I figured put his boat in the swamp right about here. This is the Nantahala boat ramp just off the reservation. This Native American found the car some 13 miles from Philadelphia in a northeasterly direction from town, and the car was probably driven to this location sometime Sunday night or early Monday morning. The car was found on Tuesday the 23rd, 2 days after the workers disappeared. We were moving away from the boat ramp a bit just to show you a little bit of the swampy area. I believe the car was actually pulled out of the swamp just up the road a bit, but it's on private land back closer to the bridge as you cross, the creek. After the car was found, many local white citizens continued to believe that this was all just a hoax. But of course, many others believed that this was a clear indicator of what had happened. You're looking down Highway 19 toward Meridian, and you're going to pan back toward Philadelphia. The three workers were released from jail somewhere around 10:30. They were pulled over somewhere in the house community off Highway 19. I'm not sure if the workers just pulled over for Deputy Price or if the convoy of Klansmen that would have been waiting in a local store for Price and the workers to pass by. Did that convoy block the highway in some way? Nonetheless, the conspirators drove the three workers back toward Philadelphia and very close to this site. This is the Mississippi historical marker just off Highway 19, used to help us remember the events that unfolded this night. Okay guys, this is the part where I need to tell you that some may find the comments over the next minute or so to be disturbing, especially younger viewers. You know, we're traveling up Rock Cut Road in the direction that Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner would have been brought that night, and what happens next is still a little bit unclear for me. I've read many different accounts and some that disagree with each other on exactly what happened, but what we do know is that three workers were brought up this road to an intersection you'll see in just a sec. I've read varying accounts as to in what order events unfolded. Some accounts say that simply Mickey Schwerner was pulled out of the car and shot, and then Goodman, and then Mr. Cheney. This is the intersection where the activity took place. I've read other accounts that say that Mr. Cheney was pulled out into the intersection here, and he was beaten with a chain, and his scrotum was cut off, and he was left mutilated in the middle of the road, and Mickey Schwerner held his head in his lap, and that's when Wayne Roberts walked up and shot Schwerner. Once the shooting began, he simply shot Andrew Goodman next. Not wanting to be left out, a man named James Jordan shot Mr. Cheney. There were several other things that the men said to each other while all this was taking place, but I simply won't repeat those here. It was all over fairly quickly. The Klansmen chunked the bodies into the back of the station wagon and proceeded to an area southwest of town and buried them in an earthen dam, all because of their work for registering African Americans to vote. Think about that for a second. Edgar Killen did a pretty thorough job organizing these events because while the bodies were being transported, someone had to be digging a 14-foot hole. They were buried in an earthen dam in what was used to be known as the Jolly Farm, and I believe it could possibly be this one, or one that obviously looks somewhat similar. The property is still private property and obviously not marked, and certainly trespassers are not wanted. A hole had been dug, the men's bodies were placed in it, and they were covered up by some 12 feet of dirt. I include this only to show you the grave of the man that orchestrated the events of that night and the only man ever convicted by the state of Mississippi for his participation. He was convicted in 2005 for his role in the murders and died in Parchman Prison years later. This is Rita Swerner. Well, on the left is Rita Swerner Bender, and on the right is Rita in 1964. At a press conference during the 40-some-odd days where her husband's body was missing, she delivered what I consider to be mind-opening commentary on the status of civil rights. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially she said, the really horrible thing about these events is the fact that nobody would even know James Chaney's name if he were not killed with two white guys from New York. In fact, did you know that while investigators were searching for the bodies of the three civil rights workers, that they uncovered the bodies of 8 African Americans? Some of their names were Herbert Orsby, who was a 14-year-old wearing a Corps t-shirt. One other was Henry Hezekiah D. and Eddie Moore. Both of them were 19 years old. And there were 5 other unidentifiable men. You've been looking at the grave of Andrew Goodman, located in New York, and this is James Chaney's grave, located in Meridian, Mississippi. Mickey Swerner was cremated. Just a reminder that the state of Mississippi never did get any convictions on the perpetrators of these crimes, at least not until 2005. The federal government stepped in and got convictions based on violation of civil rights. Let's honor the sacrifices of these 3 men, their families, and their communities each and every time we vote. There's much more to the story of Freedom Summer and the murders of these 3 workers, but for that I urge you to do some research on your own and see what you can learn about this story. I also invite you to leave comments that would be helpful for learning in the comment section of this video. I hope you've had an opportunity to learn a little bit today, and I want to take this opportunity to say thank you.